Welcome to the Road to War Episode 2. Today we're going to be interviewing two top tier ITC ranked players. One is going to be Mark, he's currently the number 4th in ITC. Then we also have Weston, who's one of the top Space Wolf players for several years running. I hope you enjoy the video and enjoy the conversations we have. There's a lot of good information. Mark and Weston are both incredible players with a lot of information to give. So we've got a couple of guests here with us to improve on actual playing of Warhammer 40k. The first is Mark Aisht. He's currently 4th in the ITC. He's got about 4 first place victories and a few other top 10% major wins. Then we also have Weston Slot, who, although not doing so hot this year, back in 2019, was about top 5% in the ITC and number 14th overall with Space Wolves. Mark, how are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Yourself?
Doing great. And Weston?
I'm doing good. Just enjoying my Sunday.
Weston also has beaten me both GTs that I've been to so far, so he's far better than myself. He dunked on me, I think, almost a 100-point win in both games, so he is in some ways my arch nemesis. So hopefully next time I'll get to play you and I'll get the win on you there.
Hopefully.
So Mark, how did you get started in Warhammer 40k and competitive play in general?
I was a competitive Magic player first. I played Magic for about 20 years and played competitively for over a decade, and I quit Magic to occupy my hobby time. I started looking for new hobbies, and I remember seeing Mortarion on the shelves of my local game store, and I was like, that looks pretty cool. So I went to do some research at home, and then I found someone selling a Death Guard army with Mortarion in it for, cheap enough for me to buy. And so I was like, all right, I'd really like to try and get to learn this game. So I bought a Death Guard army, wanted to play Mortarion really bad. It was somewhere around the middle of 8th edition, and a few years ago. And that's how I started. And then I just started playing in my local group. I noticed that, like, tactics generally with games, games come down to numbers and all that sort of thing. So even though I didn't know perfectly what was going on, I did have good information on, I could ask questions, crunch some numbers, see what averages were, and make decent decisions off of that. And through that, I was found by one of my friends who he suggested that I come try to go to a GT with him. I did well. I ended up placing I placed 3rd at my first GT ever and tournament ever, and from there I decided maybe I have a chance to play this more competitively. So I kind of delved in head first after that.
Okay, so you've been playing for about 3 years then, and Death Guard have you played any other armies, or is it just Death Guard?
Oh no, I have about I have a little over 100,000 points of chaos at this point.
100,000 points of chaos.
Yeah, I was 2009 or last year. Last year I ended as the number 1 demons player for ITC as well, and I was ranked 93 or 94 in ITC.
And how much is that painted for the listeners here aspiring?
Oh, I don't count it, so I probably have about 10,000 points I still need to paint, but I don't count it towards my collection until it's. So I have 100,000 plus painted. Now, I will say about 40,000 of it is I'd say overall right now painted, the roundabout number would be about 120 to 130,000. Unupgraded, and about 40,000 of it or so are my Titans. I own 11 Titans, Warlords, Bringers,
Warhounds. That is probably the highest I've ever heard someone say they owned. And then Weston,
I love chaos.
Oh, sorry.
So I started Warhammer a long time ago. I was really young. Funny enough, I'd accidentally walked into a Games Workshop instead of a GameStop when I was like 8. because the name was very similar. And I looked around and I saw this was back in fourth edition when you could get like guardsmen in boxes of 20 for like $20. So I'd picked up a box of guardsmen and some sentinels. And the local store owner and the players, they were pretty nice and fun. Eventually, a couple years later, I ended up moving away with my parents to another place, and there weren't very many stores around, so I'd put it down for a long time. And then when I got older, basically right my senior year in high school, I want to say, I started getting back into 40k pretty heavily. I played it for a while, then I joined the army, just kind of sat on it for a while. Then I found a new group of people that started playing it. So I picked it back up. I started going pretty heavy into it, playing a lot. And in 2019, a older member of the esports team, he had been around the area that I was at, and he'd kind of like chaperoned me in, pulled me into the competitive play. He used to stomp me a lot, and then I kind of started getting better and better over time, and then I could start, holding my own, and then eventually I'd either pass him or, like it wasn't just a one-sided fight at that point. And I used to go to events. He ended up encouraging me to go into the pro tabletop. That was in 2019, so that was really fun. I did pretty well there considering the meta that was there at the time. Generally, I enjoyed it. I did pretty good. I think I was number two in 2019 worldwide for Space Wolves. 2020, obviously, COVID kind of messed everything up, and then this year I am trying to figure out what to do with this army.
Yeah, and we'll be talking about a little bit later too how you make a kind of known as suboptimal codex work. So I definitely want to get your opinion on that. But so I saw some of your ITC rankings. You had played with Space Wolves, but you also had a few Catachan Jungle Fighters in there. Do you play Imperial Guard as well, or is it basically just Space Wolves now?
So Guard was my original love way back when I was young. That's what picked me up. What inspired me to start Guard was I used to love watching the old cheesy 80s movies. So Starship Troopers pulled me right into Guard pretty quickly, Guard and Tyranids. But I collected Deathcore Krieg for a long time. I ran him as Catachan because back in the beginning of 8th edition, for those that played, probably remember the good old triple Lord of War, double Trojan support for Guard. So you'd run probably like 2 Shadow Swords and a Baneblade, get rerolls across the board with an Assassin or something. So that's what I did initially when I wasn't like, super good at the game because that list was extremely easy to pilot.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I need to get better at is preparing for tournaments and actually building up to them, because every GT I've gone to, I've essentially lost every game. So I want to learn more about how you guys prepare for tournaments and kind of practice along the way. So how often are you guys getting practice games in? We'll start with you, Mark.
Yeah, so practice games wise, I mean, when you're looking at GTs, I try to go to RTTs any weekend that I can because it's a good way to mix things up and whatnot. If you drive an hour or two out to get an RTT, you're going to mix it up and not play the same people every time. I think that's a big thing, is one of the big hurdles for a lot of people, that a lot of the pro players, they have the advantage with the access they have to different armies and stuff like that, is that even if you only get, say, 3 to 5 games against a certain type of army, that's a lot of experience against that army that someone else doesn't have. Because a lot of people look at it, oh, it's 3 games, not a big deal. Well, if the average game takes 2 to 3 hours, that's 6 to 9 hours in 3 games that you're learning this army, not only your own but someone else's, in a different army at that. And that's the thing, is if we did any kind of test on any subject and I gave someone 6 to 9 hours of free study material before the test, and then we sat down and we took the test together, the person with 9 hours of study time is going to do much better than the other person. So I think doing repetitions and doing them with different armies, sticking out your games. I think when you go to RTTs and you go to games and the writing's kind of on the wall and whatnot, it is good if you've kind of gotten what you can get from the game and recognize, you want to practice efficiently. But if you really don't know the army, and there's something to be said for doing a little more, then keep going through the game, keep going through and trying to get everything you can out of the game. if you aren't at an RTT and you're just practicing at a friend's house, then you can go ahead and re-rack and restart and do another mission, because you're going to have that playtime no matter what, and you might as well start with a new mission, start trying to pick up from there. But that's one of the big things is I try and get my reps in. I try to identify what I'm doing wrong, and then the other big thing is obviously trying to stay away from things like results-based thinking. I
Yeah,
think
could
that's
you
a big thing that a lot
explain
of
that?
people do in practice.
Could you explain what
Yeah.
is results-based thinking and why you think it's not a good way of thinking?
So a big thing in any competitive game is people, we like to see results, and seeing consistent results over a period of time is a fine way to measure how something is going. But what a lot of people get caught up in is, we can all agree that charge charging something like Mortarion with um a squad of 10 intercessors is not necessarily, and with the goal of killing Mortarion, um is not really a good plan. It's not a good idea. uh However, you could, and this is a very extreme, like very far on the bell curve, um as far as luck goes, you could statistically, if dice broke amazingly well, kill Mortarion. Now, if that does happen and that does occur, what you don't want to do is fall into the trap of, if something happened, if something bad happened or something good happened, and it happened because of really rough dice rolls, and but this was the result that happened. Don't get it in your head that, okay, well, that was a bad plan because it didn't work out, or it was a good plan because it did work out. Generally, we want to find out, we want to crunch our numbers, see what averages say, and then base it off of that. If something's a 50-50 toss up, might be a good plan, might be a bad plan, based on, what are the rewards for succeeding in the prices of failure. Versus if I have a 90% chance at something, um, I once charged a Leviathan Dreadnought with Mortarion on 14 wounds. My Mortarion, this was an 8th edition. My Mortarion died in Overwatch.
Okay.
Statistically, that's an anomaly.
Mhm.
That, but it can happen. Now, what I don't want to do from there is go, well, the last time I charged a Leviathan, it didn't work out for me. So my next game, when I have the opportunity to charge a Leviathan Dreadnought with Mortarion, I'm just not going to do it. Well, that's a bad play, and I'm making a bad decision because I'm thinking of results-based thinking, not what the actual statistical proper play is. You know what I mean? So try to avoid that even when you win a game. Don't sit there, and I think this is the macro version of it. People will win a game and not think about, well, what did I do wrong in that game? Because they went, oh, I did stuff right because I won. Well, that's not necessarily true. You might have just screwed up slightly less than your opponent. Oh, I lost. I messed up everything. Well, that's not necessarily true either. Sometimes dice break a certain way, or you might just be kind of at a huge disadvantage from the leap, and you actually made a pretty good game out of it. So trying to analyze that and practice efficiently with that in mind, that's a big thing in how I prep.
Okay, so just a quick summarize of that results-based thinking. Essentially, if, and correct me here if you see it differently, just because something happens and is unlucky doesn't mean the strategy was incorrect. Sometimes dice are just going to break some way, and you shouldn't let an unlucky dice roll inform that your tactic was bad. Is that correct?
Absolutely, that is definitely one of the big things, and I would add on, the other big thing with that is that you do have to weigh sometimes a play where um you have to play to your outs, and that's where you start looking at things like, you can have what would be considered a bad play, but it's legitimately the only way you can necessarily win is by risking something. There's a lot of risk reward to it. If I only have a 10% chance of doing something, but it's legitimately the only way I can win the game, well, then of course I'm going to do it. But if I only have a 10% of doing something, and by attempting it, I could lose myself the game, and I have other ways to win, then I'm not going to attempt it, because that would just be foolish, in my opinion.
I agree.
But
And
yeah,
then one quick question I have for you too, because I don't think I got a good answer on that one. Was how often, like, are you actually playing games Like, are you playing it twice a
Oh,
week? Do you play 100 games before a tournament?
I
What is your kind of goal?
my goal generally is my goal is to play one game warm up before an RTT, and before like GTs, generally like 3 games in the week. So one game in a week before an RTT, just to go through, kind of loosen up, get into, the whole I'm all right, this is how I'm playing, this is that, and all that sort of thing, and to adjust to any adjustments I've made in my army. And then if it's like a GT or a major, I'll go for like 3 games in that week. Um, just because of my schedule permitting. I honestly would do more if my schedule permitted, but with work and everything, that's what I can squeeze in.
And then Weston, how often are you playing, and how are you like practicals? How are you practicing and getting better at Warhammer 40k?
So for like if I'm going to a GT or like a big event, like let's say like Warzone Atlanta or something, I do like to get as many games in as possible. But Warzone's a hot minute away, so like you can go to other events to get practice from that. RTTs are a great source of that. Just like Mark said, you get to play other people. Um, Sometimes you can be out there, like you could prep. You could prep really well to fight like the meta right now. You could get ready to fight the Eldar, the Death Guard and AdMech now, and you could be hot rolling, and then sometime at an RTT, you're gonna come up against someone that has like I don't know, Grey Knights or Tyranids, and their list is designed specifically for some reason, and it's super good against you and just crushes you. The and it's a good idea to get that experience in RTT because it'll give you another perspective. Because even though there are some armies that are really weak, they can still pull out an amazing win on you, and it helps teach you how to play on the back foot. So like if you're getting crushed and maybe you can't pull out a win, but you can at least pull out a high loss, that's a good practice for that. I always try to lose high as best as possible.
Hmm.
Sometimes, it just doesn't happen. But losing high is still good because like if you're lost and if you lose and you're still scoring like 70 plus points, like it's a good loss.
Do you
There's
play
no way,
out?
there's no reason to go
Continue.
ahead.
I was gonna say, do
I,
you practice all? Do you play your practice games all the way through, or do you just do what Mark was saying and sometimes re-rack if it looks like you've already lost?
so both the if I'm getting my butt kicked in a game, I like to play it out to see what I can do. Sometimes you'll get stuck in that mindset. Like I do suffer, or I do get like Warhammer fatigue, so I'll get really tired and I'll have to like stop playing, or else I'll burn myself out. But sometimes you'll go into like, let's say it's like round four and there's only like a couple of units left. You can kind of like math hammer it out pretty quickly if you want to solve it. But re-racking, so like playing the one thing I learned with playing other players of the esports team was in eighth edition. What we used to do is deploy, do your first turn, and restart.
Hmm.
Because a lot of times it's not so much now with the newer armies, but I've noticed with the older armies, especially eighth edition, sometimes you can almost win a game by just your deployment alone and your opponent's deployment.
I felt like that happened to me a few times at the last GT, where I deployed and then I took my first turn, and I was like, I wish I could go back. I think one of the obvious examples was one of my games against you, where I had put some assault intercessors on a crater, and I couldn't run them up to the middle objective just because I deployed them in a bad location, so they couldn't advance there. So I definitely think that's something that we could all do better at. Certainly myself as well.
Yeah. It's I haven't done that as much recently, but it's definitely something to practice because deployment I believe deployment is one of the most important phases of the game. Like it doesn't seem like it much to some people, but like your deployment could win you the game just based purely off of like positioning. That extra inch somewhere or that, just that staying out of line of sight from a certain direction, it can keep you alive and it's really important.
Okay, yeah, we'll go back to Mark here. I want to keep focusing on the preparation side of kind of leading up to a tournament. So one issue I have is that Warhammer is just constantly evolving. There's these points changes, new codices, GT pack missions, secondaries, rules from a white dwarf. How are you keeping up with all of those changes?
So, um, there's a thing that I like to say that comes from when I played Magic, um, and I know Ken has heard me say it before. A few guys in the team have heard me, say it, but it's everybody sucks at this game. We're all just trying to suck less than our. Um, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're going to make a mistake. There's so many rules changes. There's so many things messed up. I've sat across the table from some of the best players in the world and been like, I don't think that works that way anymore. And then we looked it up, and that's how it goes. And I've gotten hit on a couple things where like, that's not a thing anymore. That's not how that works anymore, and stuff like that. Everybody does it. We try and keep it to a minimum. Obviously, we want to play as right of a game by the rules as possible. But except that you're gonna mess some things up. But the fact is again, repetition is a big part of that. Again, as we're doing stuff and whatnot, and as we play people, going through these rules, having 2 hours and 3 hours per game, that repetition is going to set something in your mind. The other big thing is asking questions. The fact is that all the information is readily available to us through asking questions. And I think a lot of people are really worried about, they're really worried to come off as someone who doesn't like know anything. But the fact is even stuff that I'm positive I know on, I'll double check and I'll ask, because there's nothing wrong with asking. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, this is the way this works, right? Hey, this is the way your army works, right? And when you ask these questions and you start asking like certain left and right limits, my common questions before a game, what's the furthest your army can shoot, or furthest any unit in your army can shoot? What does that look like, stats wise? What's your best melee unit in your opinion? What does that look like stats wise? What's the fastest X can move? Can you do anything to do an advance in charge? Yada yada yada. And I generally ask, for fastest, hardest hitting, toughest, whatnot, to see what the biggest things are, and all the other stuff I kind of calculate as we go in on the game, and I'm pointing certain units as they're being moved and asking questions, because that's my time to kind of collect information and whatnot. As far as the generic rules and stuff like that, honestly, like I said, repetition is a big way to do it. As you go through, the good news is that like we don't have to relearn the entire GT packet. The GT packet coming out has some changes to some of the rules. And when we look at it, now that we've learned the GT packet, and trust me, it took all of us, I'm pretty sure, a few months of doing games to kind of really learn the GT packet. But now we've got it mostly down. We know what the secondaries look like and all that, and now they're changing. Well, there's only a handful of changes. So now, as long as we keep those in mind, we can learn those handfuls within a few games and that's generally how I look at it. And as long as you kind of use the old stuff as building blocks as things change, it's when new additions come out, that's when it's really like, well, everybody's on a totally clean slate. But as you go through, you're going to find that, and as you play more and all that sort of thing, you'll find that in my opinion, you'll have a good foundation from the previous rules, and you just got to make your slight adjustments, get your repetitions in, and learn by playing. I think learning by playing and learning by doing your repetitions is a great way.
I definitely agree that there is so much to learn in just Warhammer 40k rules in general, that someone as like myself, who's a new player who doesn't have that base like you talked about, it seems like everything is totally new. And then before I even play against Drukhari for the first time, a new codex comes out for them. They do something totally different. So I definitely see the value in building that base and then learning from there. But let's say a new codex comes out like AdMech, and you're going to go to a GT. Is your prep just playing a few games against them, or do you watch YouTube videos? Do you watch podcasts? Is there any other content you consume besides just playing games?
I will watch YouTube videos. Honestly, the thing with the YouTube videos thing though is that learning from the YouTube videos is more of an after effect. It's not something I seek out to do. I just like to watch battle reports. I enjoy the content. They're fun. But and I happen to consume knowledge from that. I don't really go in going, man, I'm gonna learn something, because that's the other thing, is that like the things you see on really commonly produced battle reports, because most battle reports cater to less hyper competitive play for the most part. So you're not going to necessarily see in a battle report, here's my here's my hyper competitive Drakari list, or the list that Nick Nanavani or John Lennon took and stuff like that. Unless you're talking about those specific channels, I watch those sometimes. But for the most part, it is playing against them. And then other than that, for prep, I'm gonna be honest. Like when the Drakari stuff came out and everybody was talking about Drakari, which I totally expected to play against Drakari. Um, all I really did to prep against Drakari was I talked to my friends as we were playing tournaments, people who played against Drakari beforehand. They mentioned some cool stuff. One of the friends of the Army esports team who comes and plays with us, he plays with Drakari, and I BS'd with him, um, theorized and whatnot. But ultimately, I just, when I sat across from the Drakari players I played against, I said, hey, run me through this. Can you do this? And I, with generic things relating to other armies and other games I've played, such as advancing and charging is really powerful. Feel no pains are kind of a big deal. Having huge weight of attack, having a lot of, or a low number of really strong attacks. And I ask for those things and I say, hey, what do these do? What do these do? What do these do? All that sort of thing. And I get generic numbers while we're setting up, because deployment takes some time. You have the time to ask, what do those do while they're deploying them? What do their base stats look like, and what are they like in combat, or what are they like when they shoot, and all that sort of thing. And from there, you can crunch your numbers. And if you know your army really well, you can go, oh man, the one thing that really deals with my Death Shroud Terminators is weight of attacks with AP2 is at strength 5 or up, is really, really good against them. So when I hear that from a unit, I go, okay, that's something that the Death Shrouds aren't great against. I'll try to pick those up with my Volkite, or I'll try and pick them up with my Plague Burst Crawlers, so my Death Shroud don't have to worry about it as much, and stuff like that. And I kind of look and I match back and forth between our armies as we're setting up. And that's really my prep, because I think when you sit there and you go, oh man, the Drakari Menace is coming. Well, the Drakari Menace, yeah, it's a hard fight. But I mean, if you look at the majors, there's still lots of Space Marines out there, and there's still lots of Chaos players and sisters and stuff like that. And the fact is, like Kim kind of hinted up a little bit, that you can build your list and you can go against the meta. You go like, I'm gonna build this anti-Space Marine list because I see a lot of Space Marines. The next thing you know, you play Imperial Guard, Gene Stealer cults, and Tyranids, and you're like, well, that didn't work out too well for me. And I think in general that is a mistake that people can make when prepping and list building, is they're prepping for the new hotness and all that sort of thing. And the thing is one, people are limited in this game by how quickly, or how slowly, I should say, it takes to build up and make an army when it comes out. So yes, everybody wants to play the best Drakari list, but not everybody has the models or the models painted and whatnot. And then on top of that, people are still figuring it out. Not everybody. You can have a really hot new codex and it still not be as efficient as the most efficient of the old codex and whatnot. So your best bet, in my opinion, is build a good all-around army, something you feel can take on most things, and understand that you're gonna have bad matchups. When I played in 8th edition as a Chaos Demons player, I had a question from one of my good buddies who's a very good player, and he's like, what if you go against X specific list with this list in particular? And I'm like, oh, I hope that they're not at that good of a player. That's what I hope for at that point if I'm going against that list. Otherwise, I hope not to get paired against them, because the fact is there's over 20 factions in Warhammer. You have at a major, at most, 9 or 10 games if you're talking like the upper echelons of the major and whatnot. You could prep all day against a faction, and if 5 of your games are not against that faction, well, you might have just made your list weaker for 5 other games to make it a bit stronger against the games you're hoping to get that faction. So have a plan. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't prep for the menace, don't prep for what you expect to see. Absolutely have plans for that, and try not to be weak against the common things, but don't go so hard in the paint against a specific list or a specific faction that you're now weak against the other 19 factions you're probably going to be facing, you know.
Mm-hmm. And Weston, do you feel like that's how you prepare as well, or do you prep a little differently?
I mean, more or less, that's similar to me. I like to the person he had mentioned earlier, the friend of the esports team. He's a relatively good player, so I usually go to him for practice, and I let him beat up on me, and I see what happens. He's very meticulous and good, so he's very good at like just knowing things that normal people don't think about because he's just very meticulous. So it's good at getting practice against him. Um, I like to practice in general, like obviously because I'm still trying to figure out where my army's at. I'm trying to figure out a good balance between like just like a good balance between all the other armies. Usually like to be good at versus one army, you have to take away from the list that's good against something else. It's very hard to make a attack list now, as they'd call them.
So Space Wolves right now are averaging a 40% win ratio in competitive 40k. So with that knowledge, why are you playing Space Wolves, and how are you trying to get around that seemingly huge deficit?
I'm loyal to my army. I hate jumping armies. I actually have a really hard time getting into painting armies that I don't actually enjoy. So that's one of the reasons why I don't meta hop, as people would call it. The plus I also have like I have about 15k of fully painted Space Wolves. So like, I got a nice reserve to draw from if I ever need to. But I've just been loyal to them. I've played the Space Wolves for a long time, and you can definitely make them work. They definitely suffer on being the lower end of the Space Marines right now. They got some pretty meh rules, and a lot of their good abilities were taken away for some reason. But someone did just win a GT with them, so his list was pretty unique. I liked it. It looked like it focused a lot on scoring and not on killing. It's just all about surviving, so it was interesting. I looked at his list and I like some parts of it. My new list that I'm running now, it's not similar to his at all, but I think it can work. It's really aggressive, but it acts in a defensive manner. So because it's something to keep in mind is you don't need to always kill to win. You could be losing the killing game every turn, but if you're scoring higher than them on your secondaries and stuff, it doesn't matter.
And Mark talked about how, if you don't want to go to a tournament and, you can't really prepare for every single army or have a matchup that's good against every single army. Do you think you have a little advantage by playing a faction that people aren't really expecting, or do you think you get hated out incidentally?
I don't think I've experienced that on either side. I mean, there's things that Space Wolves, some of their niche rules that don't normally come into play, probably because like I know a lot of people who play Space Wolves are typically newer players. They don't play super competitively, so they probably don't like know the abilities. But like one thing you learned was my 6-inch heroic intervention, which I used to do some cool shenanigans to move all my characters around, and that's what armor rust your entire Sanguinary Guard squad.
Mm-hmm.
Like stuff like that is really fun, and that catches people off guard. Um, Even if you tell them like, "Hey, I can go 6 inches," sometimes they just don't plan for it.
Yeah, oh
It's
yeah,
hit or miss.
I
I've never
certainly
really
did.
came into a yeah. It's hit or miss because I've never really in ninth edition. I haven't really run into anyone that's been like, "Oh, I don't know none of their rules." In eighth edition, when we had some really janky things like we can intercept deep strikers with any unit, that caught people off guard when a Leviathan was shooting at your deep striking squad.
Okay, so now let's move a little bit away from preparation into the actual competition. You're at the tournament. You've done all you can to prepare. So, Mark, do you have any pre-tournament rituals or must-dos?
Nah, I just hang out with my friends. I'm there. So I don't get me wrong. I like competitive play. I love having to think, and I want to do well. But I'm there to have fun, and so hang out with my friends. We once we see pairings are up, everybody, we kind of look around the room. What'd you get? What'd you get? Who got what? Oh man, you've got the new menace. That sucks. Oh no, da 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 da, blah blah blah. Oh, my matchup's good. We just kind of BS with each other, wish each other luck, and head on to our boards. Honestly, usually I'm stationed out of Tennessee, so I'm doing road trips usually to the major events and stuff like that. Other than some in Nashville that are starting to crop up, it's mostly like Georgia and Texas, and sometimes like Illinois and out in St. Louis and whatnot. And that's usually where I'm driving to, and we just kind of hang out and BS, and we will we will play a little bit of sometimes, depending on the group I'm with, we'll play a little bit of Stump the Chump with like little what can we do, certain rules, certain interactions and whatnot, or we will talk on the way. The if you have a large group of friends that play and they all have different different codexes they like to use and all that sort of thing. Like one of my buddies, Jeremy, he plays Custodes. I've asked him a bunch of questions about Custodes. I've asked my buddy Tarzan about Orcs. I've asked my buddy Matt about just about any fact. He's generally good with a bunch of them. And we'll sit there in the car ride, and they'll ask me a lot about Chaos. Like I very consistently get, whether it's Chaos Demons, Death Guard, Thousand Suns, Chaos Space Marines, or Chaos Knights. They're like, hey, what should I watch out for from this kind of a list or that kind of list? And we'll look at the lists beforehand once lists are locked in and visible. And sometimes we'll go through the lists and be like, hey, did you see this list? Do you know what to do against this? What is this guy trying to do? What should I watch out for? And we'll kind of do that back and forth with the lists we kind of recognize with what tricks we're familiar with from us using them and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. And Weston, do you ever, put some headphones on, blast some music, pop an Advil? Or are you in the same boat for not really doing anything crazy right before a tournament?
Well, I do definitely make sure I have like Advil, ibuprofen, because after that third game, I don't know, I always get that. I get tired, I have that headache.
I had heard that advice, and it was one of those things I was like, what does that mean? Like, that's something that old people do because, their back is hurting or whatever. And then I actually played 3 rounds, and I said, okay, I get it now.
Yeah, the I don't have too many. I wouldn't say I have any really rituals. I used to for a while with the group I was at. We'd always go to Waffle House early before an event, which is fun. But I just try to make sure I have my drinks, get some water, some energy drinks and stuff, and just go over the list we're going against. Like if you're going to a big event, usually the pairings are posted the night of, or at least the lists are open the night of. So you go through all the lists and see what's going on. Usually the second day the pairings are for the second round or usually the 4th round is ready by the time you go home. So there's that too. So you can always see who you're playing and start prepping to play against them and stuff like that. But other than that, it's just like Mark. I'm there at the end of the day. I'm there to have a good time. So like, it's if you win, you win. If you don't, you don't. I'm gonna try to win, but
yeah, Mark. One of the issues I've been having is that like I said, I'm pretty new to Warhammer, and it's obviously very complicated with all the different rules. But when you're actually in the game, you've got some rules that are at the end of your movement phase, some at the command phase, some at the end of the round. All these different, kind of plates that are trying to spin. How do you remember to do all of those things as you're going through a game?
There's certain things in Magic, and I swear I'll relate this very quickly, but basically there's phases in Magic that you go through, and they can you pass through them automatically, and you can forget certain things that happen before you draw a card, but then you forget to do it and you draw your card and you're like, oh, I already passed that step, now it's too late. Sounds familiar to a lot of 40k players, right? So what a lot of people do is when they go to do stuff and whatnot, they develop a specific habit. For Magic players, it's drawing a card, is them moving on past that little step to do extra things, and they'll put something in their way to stop them from doing that before they move on, and that's kind of their reminder. The Magic players, a lot of times you'll see them put a dice or something on top of their deck. When they go to draw a card, they're like, wait a minute, that's right, before I move this dice off and all that sort of thing, I still got to do my upkeep and check on those things. With Warhammer, it's a little more complicated, but if you get yourself into a habit of, before I pass on the movement phase or whatever, I'm going to have a little ticker or something, is something you can do where it goes, we're in the movement phase, we're in the psychic phase, we're in the blah, 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 right? Something you can do, like, I forgot Deep Strikers once in a recent tournament, and it did cost me some points. Luckily, it didn't cost me a game, but it almost did. If you're used to moving a tracker to see what phase it is, and you put it over on your tray where your Deep Strikers are and stuff like that, and you go from the movement phase to the psychic phase with your tracker, and you're right next to your models, that can help remind you and stuff like that. If you have certain things like the psychic cards and whatnot, and as you cast your powers, you flip them face down next to your, or you take them off the table and put them on whatever creature you buffed or debuffed or whatever model you hit or helped. And as you go through the cards, you have them next to your tracker, and then you go to your tracker and you go to move it from the psychic phase into the shooting phase, and you're like, wait a minute, I still have 4 cards here. Normally I go through all my psychic powers with my cards. What happened? Oh, okay, I forgot to go to this guy and cast these powers, or something like that. And having little physical reminders and physical obstacles to moving phases, as well as the physical reminders there next to that, will help generally clean that up a little bit. And it's a technique that a lot of people can use as they're getting used to that sort of thing. If you play enough, sometimes it just becomes habit, and then some people abandon using it because they're like, all right, I don't miss this anymore. Some people abandon using it, and then they're like, oh man, I'm forgetting again. All right, I'm going to go back to using tracker and whatnot.
Yeah, so physical reminders in order to kind of build this habit pattern. I know you use Magic the Gathering as an example, and my wife plays Magic, and she still says untap, upkeep, draw when she's starting her turn to go through the different phases. And hopefully one day you don't need to do that, but giving yourself no other option but to notice that you're going through these phases or something like that. Okay, Weston, what about you? What do you use to remember all these things?
So I do use the psychic cards. I do like to place them down after it's cast. But one of the methods I use to help remind me, because especially command phase things always catch me, because I'm so used to getting the CP and then immediately moving away that I have to remember myself, or I have to remind myself. Is what I'll do is it's a little bit harder when you're on a chess clock, obviously, so you have to practice with the chess clock to get more efficient at it. But I go from left to right on my board and look at everything that needs like anything that can be done in the command phase that I want to do it, including stratagems. Like there's some stratagems for Space Marines to change your doctrines in the command phase and stuff. So that's definitely something you gotta like keep in mind if you want to do. And then I go into movement and I move it. Do my movement the same way. I do go from left to right, but sometimes like just like because you've played 40k, sometimes units need to interact with each other, or you need to shoot at one unit across the table and stuff. So you got to still plan for that and maneuver around. So that's when it starts to break down a little bit. But once you like get your just left to right feeling, you can usually just like I don't want to say like tunnel vision on it because that's not a good use, but like hey, I know this dreadnought needs to shoot at this unit, so you just make sure you're ready. That dreadnought gets moved there, and it's going to shoot at that unit. You make sure your ranges are correct, and then maybe there's a backup or something somewhere else. Because I like to make it to where my units have at least 2 options sometimes. So obviously that's not always possible. But I like to make it to where, like, if I'm going to shoot at one unit with a dreadnought, I want to be able to charge somewhere else, or I want to be able to be in a spot where I can shoot and I can't get return fire as much, or something along those lines.
Yeah, it sounds like you use a deliberate kind of same process every game, going left to right, going through the different models, what they're capable of, and setting them up for their future, actions. That sound right?
Yes, I mean I still forget things and I'm still working on it. Though the rules I forget aren't necessarily like rules of the game, but stratagems. I'll sometimes an event will happen and then I'll think about it and be like, oh, I totally had a stratagem to stop this, or I had something to help me here. So that's one thing I do. I do like to sit down and just read all my stratagems every once in a while and just keep rereading them, because sometimes you'll never know. Sometimes you just have a random like thought in your head like, oh, I have an ability to stop this, and then you go open up your book and figure out where it's at.
Mm-hmm. So, Mark, tell me about a time where you walked up to a table and it was a bad matchup like you talked to. You're hoping you didn't play against them. The terrain was not in your favor. The mission was not in your favor. How do you overcome that?
So I mentioned a little earlier, I said a phrase, play to your outs and whatnot. If your outs or the way you can win is only, 10% chance, and it's what would normally be considered kind of a foolish plan, that's what you got to do. If that's the only way you can win, if that's your best chance, that's what you've got to go to. I think one example for me was I was playing at a tournament where it was player set terrain. And the way the tournament was set up, you could end up on tables where there were up to 8 obscuring pieces of terrain, or down to 2 obscuring pieces of terrain, depending on which table you ended up on. And with that, this was when I was playing my demons, and I play a lot of large demons. Obscuring helps me a lot. I ended up, out of my 5 rounds, I ended up on the same table 3 times, actually. The worst table for me. There were 2 obscuring pieces, and the rest of the pieces were things like containers, craters, and forests, which slowed my movement. And all I have with demons is melee, really. And because of the rule of terrain had to have a 3-inch gap, but the large demons come on a round base, which is about 3.5 inches wide. I was blocked constantly from my movement, but never obscured in that terrain, and it was very difficult that entire time I was playing on those terrain pieces. And the field constantly got set up with when I ended up on that table, where I would place an obscuring piece right in the middle, and then they would place the other obscuring piece in the corner of the table facing the wrong way, so it didn't effectively do anything. And then it would just be lots of lanes of craters and woods and crates that would stop me from moving wherever I wanted to, or slow me down. And that's one of those situations where I knew that, okay, the only way I win this against like this heavy shooting army is I have to kind of throw nuance out the window, charge forward with everything, threat saturate. That's not normally how I do things. And a lot of times that's a poor plan if you're just going for, if you're trying to be strategic and you're trying to be like, all right, well, I'm going to send enough force over here that I know I can take this corner of the board. Well, I'm going to send enough force over here to guard this part of the board, stuff like that. I couldn't do that. My plan was I need to go in, kill as much stuff as possible in 1 to 2 turns, and hope that the dice go in my favor. And it worked out 2 of the games. It didn't work out 1 of the games, and I'm fine with that. Like, again, you can't control where you end up or how the board looks all the time, and you can't you can't prep for everything. So play to your outs, pick your pathway to victory. If the pathway is pretty straightforward and linear, don't overthink it. Don't sit there and go, oh man, I've got to come up with some crazy plan. Sometimes the crazy plan is, I need dice to break like 70% in my favor, and that's what needs to happen. And then sometimes you do have to be overly meticulous, and you have to sit there and go, all right, I need to nickel and dime every bit of protection I can out of this field. I need to sit there and look at the windows and look at this and look at that and get what I can out of this field in every single move is meticulous. And so I'd say yeah, I've had those instances where I've sat there and I've gone in and talk about when we get pairings, our buddies, we always go, oh hey, you got paired with this, that sucks. You got paired. Where I've sat there, I'm like, guys, guess what I got paired with, and everybody, we let out a collective groan of, oh man, good luck, you know what I mean? But you got to sit there and you've got to kind of just start developing a plan as you see their army and as you're sitting at the board. Don't give up just because it's stuff doesn't go your way, because this is what I'd say to people if they look at a board and sit there and go, oh man, there's no way I'm winning this match. I think we hold on to like negative experiences a little better, like a little more, it resonates with us a little more, or we think about it a little more. We do positive. Think of all the matches that you've gone up and you thought, man, I've got this one. And then you walk away going, how did I lose that one? Well, guess what? Maybe it's your turn now. Maybe they're the ones who are saying they got this one, and then you get to say, walk away with them going, how did I lose that one? There's a little give and take to it.
Yeah, I really like that idea you talked about, which is like, yeah, playing to your outs, taking those riskier plays if you're behind, giving yourself options. I also really respect the way that you still try to play it out. I think too often, people, we get on our own heads and then we, kind of self-defeat ourselves because that's what we want. I mean, do you think there's such a thing as an unwinnable game?
I mean, mathematically there isn't. There can't be. As infinitesimally small of the odds are, your opponent can roll all ones while you roll all sixes. But the fact is that I think that the only reason, if it goes matchup wise, if you're talking like if I was sitting in a mirror facing myself and we had two different armies, no, I don't think there's an unwinnable matchup. I think there's really bad matchups, but not an unwinnable one. The only time a matchup is unwinnable, I think, or feels unwinnable is skill difference between players. In a lot of cases and whatnot, and that's easily improved on. You just got to be able to acknowledge that. And one thing you don't want to, there's another big trap with people who are trying to develop as players. I get it. It sucks playing against, the new Drakari hotness, or playing against Death Guard, or playing against, possibly Admech when they come out and all that sort of thing. They're going to have some really great stuff. But when you lose to whatever the case may be, whether it's the new hotness or some really tricky stuff you didn't know about and all that sort of thing, if you sit there and go, oh man, this stuff is just overpowered, this stuff is just ridiculous and just needs a nerf, and that's all you take away from the match, you're doing yourself a disservice and being a player. Lots of people love to blame their dice. Lots of people love to blame, and don't get me wrong, I've lost games off of dice too, but that doesn't mean I sit there and go, the only reason I lost was because of dice. Well, how could I have mitigated the issue to put myself in a situation where I didn't have to rely on the dice better than what they were, or something like that? What can I do to improve? You have to look at those things, and if you just complain about the other person's army, or you just complain about dice rolls, or you just do that, then you're not going to improve. You're going to stay the exact same level that you're at right now, because that's the only way to get better at something, is to acknowledge that you first step to being kind of good at something is kind of sucking at something, and you have to acknowledge that you're not good at something if you're not good at something. And just because, even if you're the best, that doesn't mean you're perfect. Just because I'm really good with demons does not mean, or Death Guard does not mean, that I can't learn something from a Death Guard match or a demon against some other player. I might know 99% of the stuff they pull, and then they pull a 1% thing on me that surprises me, and I go, oh wow, didn't think about that. And I have to sit there and analyze that, and not get wrapped around the axle about losing a game, to wrap my head around why I lost, and how I can do better.
I really like the mindset you have there, where you don't let the dice or the matchup determine that you have already lost, or you don't let a loss be blamed on something as silly as dice. Like, you take responsibility and say, there are things I could have done, let me figure out what I could have done to minimize those risks, to do better. So I really like that mindset. And then Weston, how do you feel about that? Do you think there's such thing as an unwinnable game, or how do you handle this when you come in and you're behind already?
I agree with a lot of what Mark said. Now, there are situations where like it's extremely hard to stay positive, especially if you go 4-0 and you're in your last game at an event. That kind of it kicks at you. It's definitely true. It hurts. Sometimes when I go up against so like if I get paired, let's say I get paired against like another team member, or like a friend or someone I know, or someone I've just always played, and I'm doing like really bad and they're doing really good, sometimes I'll just throw my entire army at them to see what happens. Not necessarily like I'm throwing away my army, just more of like, hey, I'm gonna see if the dice are gonna let you win this or not, type of thing. Sometimes it's fun to have those Hail Mary games, because then it's not really like tactics at that point. I'm just kind of like, blowing steam off, throw a bunch of guys up the field. If I kill stuff, I do. If I don't, like it's whatever. I never expected to win. So that happens, but like you should definitely try to play out like a normal opponent. Like if I'm going against someone normal and I don't think I can win, I'm gonna do my best to score as high as possible, while also trying to mitigate what he can score. So I'll be playing a lot more defensive, picking defensive secondaries, while also picking off units that he needs to score his secondaries and stuff. So and then sometimes you can win that way, honestly. Like I had a game where I had a Volkite Contemptor kill 300 points more than what it should have killed, but my opponent wanted to only roll 2s for his armor save, so he lost an entire 6-man squad of Terminators.
Yeah, so it
It's
sounds
pretty
like
ridiculous.
yeah, you're playing till the you're trying to maximize the points and minimize theirs, even if you don't think you can win, because you can always give yourself those outs, and
Yep.
you don't want to count yourself
And
out
something to keep in
beforehand.
mind. Something to keep in mind. The dice always turn around. Like no matter how bad you roll, sometimes you'll come into another game and just only roll like 5s and 6s. You'll never fail anything. It's wild how. So if you like, I don't know. It's just odds and luck and however else you want to call it. But like, you can roll really bad one game and then roll really hot the other. One of the issues I had when I first started playing competitively at RTTs was I'd roll like super hot the first 2 games, and the last game I'd roll super bad and get pooped on. It was like consecutive. It was like 6 or 7 events in a row that would happen. Um, and I figured out that it was just like always my third game I'd roll bad, and then the fourth game it'd start to even out, and then the fifth game was up in the air, like at bigger events. It was pretty funny. My friends used to keep a list of like it didn't matter what army my opponent played in the third round. He would always win because I would just roll so bad. And they used to keep a chart. They'd go around and like tell him, "Hey, don't worry, it's an easy win."
So Mark, don't be humble here, because you're clearly successful at Warhammer 40k. I mean, at this point, number 4 in the entire ITC, doing well multiple years in a row. What is giving you that competitive advantage that's allowing you to do so well?
Honestly, quick math. Quick math helps you in any situation with gaming, because gaming's ultimately math. It's what it is. We crunch a bunch of numbers. There's certain things that can happen, such as, I think everyone here can agree. I don't have to ask, hey, do you think you statistically have a good chance of taking down Magnus with 20 guardsmen firing their las guns at him? We all know that's that's not a great target for the guardsmen. They'd rather be firing at something like blue horrors or something. You know what I mean? We can very easily make determinations with those extremes. Obviously, we're not trying to send our las cannons at gene stealers. We're put them into monster nids and stuff like that. Stuff like that becomes very apparent as you just know the basics of the game. But it's the nuance, the more nuanced fights with math. One of the big things that a lot of people have underestimated that has gotten me the win is Death Shroud Terminators. I don't hide what my Death Shroud Terminators do. I let people know these are the most dangerous things you're going to see in melee combat. With the Biologist Putrefier behind them, they are vicious. And then on top of it, with my Revolting Stench Vats, you counting as not charging, I'm going to get to swing first. It's going to pick up whatever you throw at them, just about. And pretty consistently, people will be like, I've got 10 Deathwing Terminators. You're not doing anything about this. And I'm like, all right, but do some quick math. I have the Arch Contaminator nearby. I let them know. I have an extra AP on my sides because I do the Inexorable. I give them the additional light through a stratagem and whatnot. 5 Death Shroud Terminators have 42 attacks hitting on. When you do the split attack, I'm going to be wounding on 4s no matter what, because of Deathwing. And I get to reroll all my wounds if I would like. So they're going to be strength 5, wounding on 4s, 42 attacks, hitting on 2s, no rerolls. We do the math there. That's statistically, you get 6 plus 1, you get 7 1, so that's 35 hits. Wounding on 4s, so that's 17.5, will round down to 17, with a total of 6 6s. Biologist Putrefier providing 6s to wound, do an additional mortal wound. So we have 6 6s and then 17 4-ups. So we have 6 mortal wounds with 17 saves so far. We can re-roll the other 18, which then should result in another 3 6s, which is a total of 9 6s, plus an additional 9 wounding hits. So we have a total of 9 mortal wounds plus 27 saves 26 saves at AP2. If they're saving on 4-ups, an additional 13 wounds. So we have 22 right there. So I've just picked up 7.3 Death Shroud, or not Death Shroud, Deathwing Terminators with that. It's statistically my average, right there. And that's what I do off the top of my head. I do that math really quick. That's why I ask for the numbers I do. That's why I say, how many attacks you got? What's their AP? What's their strength? Cool. I know the rest of the numbers. I can plug them in myself. I do that math before I determine, should I make this move to go charge this? Should I go do this? Should I go do that? And whatnot. But a lot of players, they don't do that math. They go, I've sat here and survived with this unit through this and that and this and that. There's no way they're going to die on this one. And then statistically, yeah, you do. Quick math is pretty much what helps give me the huge advantage. I'm always calculating. If it's not my turn, you'll see me. I pace around the table a lot, and that's because I'm sitting there doing math on what it's going to take for charges. You know, I'll be measuring distances while my opponent's moving and stuff like that at any given time. And while they're on their turn or I'm on my turn, if there's any information I'm missing, I'll ask. I'll say, what does this do? What are these defenses like for the purpose of my attacks? What are these attacks like for the purpose of my defense? You know, and stuff like that. And as I'm doing that, I'm sitting there and making mental notes. Good matchup, bad matchup. Stay away from these things with this, but get towards them with this instead, and stuff like that. The entire time I'm playing. There's no point where I sit down and go, not my turn now. It's time to go ahead and take a break, you know, and just sit down. The break time is for in between the games, you know.
Yeah, I really like the active way you play there, where even in your opponent's turn, you're actually thinking about your next moves and doing math out. I know that's something I'm pretty guilty of. Is just like, okay, do whatever you're gonna do with me. Tell me how many rolls I gotta make. So I think that's a really good lesson to take away, is being more active and thinking about all those things through the opponent's turn. But, you know, I kept with you for most of the math you were doing at the beginning, and I think you lost me there at the end. But what can someone do who maybe doesn't have that experience or, you know, reps for doing that quick math beforehand? What can they do to kind of, you know, get to where you are now?
So, I mean, definitely practice on doing things like, all right, keep in mind, we're functioning off of a 6-sided die. Everything's going to be like, we don't have to sit there and calculate. You don't have to know, okay, an 8-inch charge with re-rolling only ones is an X percentage. I don't know that off the top of my head. What I can tell you, though, is, you know, if you go by generic terms, every 1/6 of the dice has a 16.7% chance to be rolled. That's what we're rolling on the dice. That's our like base to look at for anything on doing math with Warhammer stuff and whatnot. But if you're looking for just if as you're trying to get into that, but you're not quite there yet, just have certain generic things memorized. Know that, you know, look at things like nuance. What are my chances at rolling a 7 on 2 dice? I think everybody should know what their chances are of rolling a 9 on 2 dice are, because we all have to do 9s, 7s, and 8s are big ones on dice, because of the fact that we have 9-inch charges off a deep strike, and then a lot of armies have a +1 or +2-inch charges. Because that helps inform your decisions. So it's just like, you know, a lot of people, they can't multiply necessarily. Like if I said 176 times 52, go, you know, that's going to take a while and stuff like that, right? But we do know our multiplication tables. We pretty much have them memorized. Like so many people have 12 times 12 up to that memorized, you know, 144, right? Well, know your chances of making a 9-inch charge or an 8-inch charge or a 7-inch charge. Just memorize those to start with. That way you can sit there and go, all right, I know this charge happens 60% of the time. Is 60% of the time worth the risk/reward? If I make this charge, what do I get out of it? You know, you're weighing your odds against risk and reward. Obviously, if there's a 70% chance that I'm going to make it. And by making this charge, I pretty much seal up the game, right? I'm going to definitely, and by not making the charge, at most I lose a couple of guys to an Overwatch against towers, like that, right? Of course I'm going to run that risk. I have a 70% chance to close out the game versus a 30% chance to lose 2 guys that won't necessarily risk me the loss. Flip that, we still have the 70-30 chance, but flip it to the risk is that if I charge with this unit and it fails right now, I just lose the game flat out. And if I succeed, really all I do is pick up a couple of drones or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then of course I'm not going to risk it. I'm not going to go anywhere near that. The chances are the same, but the risk and reward are different. So knowing your basic chances and what you're willing to risk and what you see as the reward, I think identifying those first and foremost can help new players. And then other than that, I would say learn your movement phase and learn your second movement phase, which is your combat phase. Because charge and combat. Ken hit up on how the deployment phase is such a huge part of the game. It absolutely is. Movement is the most important stat in the game. I think movement's the most powerful stat. Because we were talking about it, some friends and whatnot, and people were talking about, yeah, but Drakari's Raiders, they only have toughness 6 or whatnot, and they have a 4-up with a 5-up invul. They're not that big, but their movement is insane with fly. What's better than having even toughness 20 with a 2-up save? Just being out of range of weapons.
Right.
If you're out of range, you have infinite armor against that weapon. You know what I mean? And same thing, you can have the most powerful weapon in the world, but if it has a 3-inch range and you have a 5-inch movement, it's not super useful. You know what I mean? Unless you're really right there. So get down your movement phase and then learn to use your charge and your combat phase for extra movement. One of the big tricks, I know Weston said you play Blood Angels. I have a friend who also plays Blood Angels, and one of the things I taught him about is using that consolidate and that pile in. I played demons all of last year, and when I played them, one of the big tricks people don't get is that if I charge you with 3 large demons into a squad of 5, do I think one keeper is not going to pick up your 5-man squad? No, it statistically should, right? But here's the thing. After I pick up that squad of 5 with the first demon, I consolidate, or I pile in my 3 inches, get a little bit further, I pile around to the backside, and then I pick them up, and then I can consolidate 3 inches towards the closest enemy. Well, now I can consolidate 3 inches closer to your line, which I'm trying to put pressure on you. Well, my other 2 demons that haven't gone yet, they've completed a charge movement. So guess what? I get 6 inches of free movement because I still get to pile in and consolidate, even though they're no longer in combat. I made a charge move. I'm allowed to pile in and consolidate towards the closest enemy. So yeah, I'm going to use that for extra movement. Little things like that, mastering those steps to get that extra movement and whatnot. Mastering the ability to move in exact ranges. Okay, I know when I play against good players, how far do your Death Shroud move? 5 inches? Great. I'm going to be 17.1 inches away, so you physically cannot charge. And I'm like, all right, great move. You know what I mean? Like, it's exactly what you should do. So I'd say if you're really looking, not necessarily, or you're in the interim of training up, trying to do quick maths over a 6-sided dice and all that, definitely get down your movement phase and just know some certain key things, the common things that come up. 4-up is a 50-50. So knowing that you'll make 50% of something, just know how to cut something in half when you're looking at your 4-up impulse, which are kind of spread across most. A 9-inch charge, an 8-inch charge, a 7-inch charge. Know what your statistics are on that and what rerolls you have or ways to make with them. And then other than that, master your movement phase. That's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely sounds like you're playing Warhammer the hard way in a lot of ways. Like, you're going through some deliberate work beforehand, to know what or at least, sometimes you do it off the top of your head, but it sounds like Yeah, you are not just passively allowing this game to happen to you. You're doing a lot of like active calculations, like you said, in the other person's turn, but also you have like a few numbers hard memorized. Where that comes to being like a 9-inch charge being what 28%, 7 inch is 56 or something along those lines, and then also knowing what your units are actually capable of in defense and offense against different units.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I know one thing I've used is the website. I can't remember what it's called right now. You just type in like Warhammer 40k dice calculator. You know, you can put in some simulation. So I imagine maybe doing something like that beforehand against different units you're going to be going up against would be a really powerful tool to do beforehand. Have you ever used those type of things?
I have not used them myself generically. I think they're a great tool. That's not saying that they're not. They are super useful. I find that continuing to do the math in my head keeps me sharp and whatnot on it.
Mm.
But I think they're a great tool, especially when we're talking about like, yeah, you don't have to sit there and do math homework and sit there and write out and show your work. If you have a calculator that does the job for you, and that's what you like to use it. Use that calculator, and all you have to do is go, all right, plug in those numbers, do a dice math app. All right, here's what I know. All right, I just got to memorize this. I just know statistically this is a bad matchup, and then you can throw the numbers out the window if you want. If you sit there and go, all right, I know Death Company versus Wolfen, you know what I mean? And I'm gonna throw these numbers into a calculator. And you throw those numbers into the calculator, and you look at what the damage the Death Company does if it gets the first swing, and you look at what the damage the Wolfen does if it gets the first swing. You sit there and go, all right, the only way I want to fight a Wolfen is if I have the drop on it. You know what I mean? You don't need to memorize, okay, statistically I do 7 out of 10 Wolfen die and da 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 blah blah blah. Once you know the numbers and you're like, all right, this is a bad matchup or this is a good matchup, you can just hold on to that and just memorize that. All right, it's a bad matchup for me to go against Wolfen in any time, whether I get the drop or not. So avoid them with the Death Company. Or as long as I get the drop, I'm good. Which at that point you go, all right, I just got to stay this far away, and you ask your opponent, do you have anything that can make me fight last? Do you have anything that allows them to advance in charge? Okay, can they advance any further? What's the maximum distance they can go while still being able to charge? Cool, that plus 12 inches, that's the threat range, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And do that, you should be good,
Okay, yeah, no, that's all real good advice. So I feel like I've been lucky, and I've only played about 10 tournament games, but every time I've played against people who are very nice and have had no real conflict. How do you deal with conflict that does arise, whether it's rules or distances or something along those lines? We'll actually start with you, Weston.
Rules conflict. It's always important just to check. Like, I don't know. A lot of players I've seen actually are afraid to even call up issues. I've noticed a lot of 40k players are pretty passive aggressive. Like they won't even say anything until like after it, and they'll go tell a TO. It's very common, and I don't know why. Like, but on the receiving end of that, or the other end, there's players that like try to bully you if you ask them their rules, and it's really funny. I don't know why people do that, but always ask to see the rule if you don't know it. And if someone asks you to see your rule, like you should have zero reason not to show them the rule. Almost no reason to say, "Hey, now you can't look at it" or something. Like that's ridiculous. Just show them your rule, and like if you're trying to hide the rule, then you're trying to hide something that obviously might not. But the rule might not work the way you're trying to implement it or something. It's just very sketchy. So I've never really had any issues beyond the typical stuff. But like, if a player's giving you a problem, just like call a judge. Like, some people have that stigma where it was like, if you call a judge, like you're out to get the opponent or something. That's not true. Like at the Dallas Open, yeah, every 3 seconds someone was calling a judge, and it wasn't people like just going at it or at each other over rules. It was just the easiest way to clarify a problem, have a judge do it. If you can't come to an easy agreement, have a judge do it, and then just take it from there. No point in arguing, no point in fighting. The judge made his call. Luckily, I haven't had that issue. Very, very few times have I ever had to have a judge come over, and it was only for like very like it wasn't like a direct issue. It was more of like we have very weird interaction with rules, and we were trying to figure out like how these rules would actually interact with each other and stuff. Um, but yeah, that's I've been pretty lucky, I guess I would say. I haven't really had that much conflict. Generally, the people I play against are pretty cool, and if they're not, I just usually finish the game and walk away. That's it.
Has that been your experience as well, Mark, or have you had any bigger issues in that?
So I mean, I've gone to enough tournaments. I think eventually when you go to enough tournaments, you're going to run into someone who is trying to mess with you on rules. It happens. Honestly, man, I'll tell you. I am someone who, uh, very much like if a rule goes a certain way, I tell all my opponents beforehand, look, man, I'm here. If you tell me your intention, and obviously it would make sense for you to do something, I let my opponents take stuff back. When they don't, I give them warnings and heads up beforehand. That's the way I play. However, if during the course of the game, uh, my opponent does not give me the same courtesy, if you will, after I've given them that courtesy, that's when I switch to, all right, well, then we're doing everything like 100%. If you're a millimeter out than when you intended to be, then I guess that's the way we'll play it. Personally, don't like playing that way, but like I am going to at least afford myself to play on even ground with my opponent. You know what I mean? I'm very big on if if there's ever a measurement dispute, I always ask beforehand, before anything happens or whatever, before we get to that point. I say, I want you to measure and double check me, such as, I intend to be in range. I intend to be within 35 inches of this thing, right? And they go, all right, okay, real quick, can you make sure that's 35? If it's really close, if it's not like 100%, I moved up to here. Can you double check me real quick? That way we can agree here in the movement phase before we get to the shooting phase, and then it's all of a sudden, well, you moved there, blah blah blah, all that sort of thing. I am more likely to agree with my opponent. I am someone who is, look, if you're trying to get over on me on the game and you succeed, get over on me, well, then you got over on me. It's not that big of a deal. If I find out later you were getting over on me, that's the only reason you won, well, then I know what really happened there. I have, I can still have pride in the fact that, really I won that match, but whatever. It's not that big of a deal if that's what someone wants to go home with. Of course, if someone is intentionally cheating, I know obviously I'm going to report it because I don't want them to do that to someone else. But if something happens where it's someone like did something and in hindsight it looks like they might have gotten over on me and they, there's no real way to prove it, well then whatever, man. If someone wants to do that and there's nothing I can do about it, well then that's on them. They'll go home, they'll sleep at night however they sleep, I'll be fine. You know what I mean? And but for the most part, 99% of the time, my games are wonderful. I have more fun at tournaments than I do pickup games. Generally, I find that tournament players tend to know what they're getting themselves into and stuff like that. And people are really respectful. People are really nice. I absolutely adore going to tournaments. It is one of the funnest things I get to do. And so with the rules and stuff like that, and when you have those debates, I think generically asking your opponent to double check you. I had one incident that happened at LVO where a guy kept making me, like, I was running out of time on the chess clock because I was moving my models like 3 or 4 times per model, because I would move them and it would be, no, I think you moved it slightly too far. And I'd be like, okay, let's double check. And it kept happening. And eventually I was like, hey man, I'm going to get a judge. He's going to come over here. He's going to watch me measure. Or you can measure for me and point out where I need to be when I say I'm moving 12 inches or I'm moving 8 inches or whatever the case may be. Because I'm not going to take the time to do this 3 or 4 times at a time because it's eating my time. And there's nothing rude about doing that. That's just, that's you keep in mind you have to have enough respect for yourself to not allow someone to bully you out of the fun of the game. Like, you know what I mean? Like, have enough respect for yourself to sit there and go, hey, you know what? This is really sucking the fun out of something. Can I get a judge so we can at least stand on even ground and stuff like that? And also, you're doing a courtesy when you stop someone from doing that kind of stuff. You're not just doing it for yourself, you're doing it for other players. Because if they get away with it with you, they're going to try and get away with it with the next guy, and the next guy, and the next guy. And whatever, guy or girl they're sitting across from, who they're playing against, if you don't try to stop it when you see it and all that sort of thing, you're honestly setting those other players up for, disappointing matches where they're going to have to play them, and they're going to try and pull the same stuff, and they're going to walk away feeling bad, and it's not a good time for anybody. So yeah, if you see it and you know it's happening in the moment, call it out. Don't be afraid, or call a judge and say, hey, this is what's going on right now. If you find out later that you lost because of something and all that sort of thing, that sucks. But give a heads up, make sure that, try and keep it from happening again. But ultimately you got to sit there and just understand that as long as you played a clean game as best you can, and you did your rules as best you can, then you got to be happy with that. You got to be proud of that, because there's too many people playing this game, but you're not going to have at least one of those debates or one of those interactions in a tournament setting going.
Just to caveat that off that, when I'm in the reversal, so every once in a while, you'll play a game and you'll play a rule wrong, and you won't catch it till the end of the game. When I've done that before on accident. Obviously, people do it. If I find out that it's like super game changing, like you played a strength value wrong or something that ended up wiping a unit out, or a save value, I usually concede. I'll just tell my opponent, like, hey man, I'm gonna concede because I played this wrong and it changed the entire game, and that's just part of good sportsmanship as well. It sucks when you beat someone, but you also beat them with like the wrong rules, so.
Yeah, I really like the way you guys have a very I want to use the phrase like emotionally detached from these rules interactions. Like in the different examples you guys gave, it was never like angry at this person, or there was no emotion behind it. It was just like, hey, I'm gonna get a judge and they're gonna do this, and you're giving your opponent the benefit of the doubt and really trying to work with them. And then obviously, Weston, you talking about conceding if you played a rule wrong. I really like that mindset. I think it's it kind of takes emotion out of it. It gives the opponent the benefit of the doubt. It holds yourself to a high standard. So I really like that mindset from both of you.
Yeah, when I'm talking about conceding though, I mean like if you play a rule wrong and it changes the course of the game, like let's say, just a random example. Let's say I shoot at a squad of Death Shroud, and these Death Shroud are going to basically destroy my army the next turn, and I get an AP value wrong, and then a bunch of his Death Shroud die, and it doesn't affect the game. That's games changing. That's something you could concede on. But like if you make a mistake and your opponent's cool with it, it's like, hey, this guy really doesn't have a 12-inch aura for his thing. It's only 9, and your opponent talks to you about it and doesn't actually change the game. You just like maybe killed 2 models and they just bring the models back. That's normal. Mm-hmm. But I mean, like I'm talking about like when you can't go back. You've too far into the game to go back.
I've definitely, like, an example for me was I played an old stratagem from the old Death Guard codex that I thought I still had. I didn't. I messed it up. Sorry. Some outgoing. Yeah, I in that game I used it to fall back and shoot, and this is when I was playing, and Death Guard don't have that anymore. They had it. It was an old thing, but they don't anymore. And so now I missed all my shots, and it didn't end up doing anything. And I found out afterwards that, oh crap, da 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 da. But it didn't end up doing anything. In fact, it actually weirdly helped because I wasn't able to move very far, and so I ended up getting heroic intervene too, which ended up giving additional damage to the White Scars player. So weirdly it worked against me. But in that case, it's one of those things where, all right, I know that now. Don't do that again. My bad. And I found out later, just going through my codex and reviewing things and all that sort of thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, I can't find that here. I swear I had it. And then I realized what had happened. And then I brought it up actually the next day to the TO, and I was like, hey, this happened. I'm letting you know it didn't affect the game, but I wanted you to know if since I got something wrong, I wanted you to hear it from me, not from someone else. I wanted to let you know that this was happening. If it is an issue, by all means, please card me. But if it's not, which I don't think it is, then I just want to make sure, you know what I mean? And just try to be courteous. If you make a mistake, you make a mistake. Everybody's going to make.
Yeah, okay. And then back to you, Mark, for another question. So obviously I'm just getting into competitive Warhammer 40k now. What advice do you have for me and any other listeners who are just trying to get into their first kind of stint into competitive play?
Pick something you like to play with. And I know that doesn't sound like a very competitive thing. Like, people want to generally hear, oh, this one simple trick to becoming a top 10 player or something like that. I mean, look, at the end of the day, however you want to play, you will burn out a lot faster playing something you don't like. I play Chaos. I understand that Chaos, right now, we're in an alright position with Death Guard. Other than Death Guard, the rest of the army's not necessarily doing so hot and all that sort of thing. I will still continue to play Chaos. One of the beautiful things about this game is maybe you're not going to be a top 100 finisher in ITC, but you could still be the top Genestealer player in ITC. You could still be the top Tau player in ITC. You can have a bad faction that if you really like, you can still do stuff, and competitive players recognize. Like, we're not going to sit there, in general, people, know that, oh, you only finished 5-2 versus, or something like that. Like, some people might be like that, but like when I see a Tau player finish 5-2, I'm like, dude, what are they? How good of a player are they? If they were using like something that's a little more updated, man, they'd be cleaning house and stuff like that. On top of it, like Weston talked about with his Space Wolves and all that, you're gonna have to paint this army. You're gonna have to learn this army. I will tell you right now something we have seen very consistently. I do, swapping between my, different Chaos factions and all that. I have the capacity that I can learn, these different armies, no problem. I have dabbled in Necrons and Tau for fun, for pickup games and all that. I will tell you, no matter how good of a player you are, you're a better player with in my opinion at least, you're a better player with a worse list that you know well than a better list. We see it when Drakari dropped, right? And we're seeing all of these top 8s with Drakari after they dropped. How many people picked up Drakari and went, oh man, now I've got the list, I'm good, and all that sort of thing, and then got just absolutely bodied, you know what I mean? Because they don't know the list. They don't know the nuance and the things they have to do to make it work and whatnot. So if you're new and you're coming into competitive, pick something you love. Pick something you like aesthetically or you like the lore of and all that sort of thing. It'll keep you on your game. It'll make you feel happier. It'll make you like stuff more. And even if your faction is not in the best of ways, well, then look at it this way: you're part of a very exclusive club of players who are still playing that faction, and you can be the best among them still. You can still come out an ITC faction champion. You can still do a lot of stuff and learn how to play that better. You know what I mean? So that would be probably my number one piece of advice for playing Warhammer in general.
And that's interesting because I feel like I see so many complaints from people who say, oh, well, so-and-so is only winning because they can afford to switch to whatever army's the top meta of the week. They can, have access to all the rules before it's even published because they're playtesters and things like that. So you kind of scoff at that, is that right?
To a degree. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're. So obviously, if all you have access to right now, Chaos Knights, we'll say, they're not doing great. Versus the guy who's about to switch from his Drakari army to his Admech army as it drops and stuff like that. Yes, when you're playing at that level of play, um, there is a difference. I'm not going to pretend like that doesn't help. I'm not going to pretend that that doesn't make an effect. But if you believe that the only reason you can't put numbers up is because you don't have the ability to switch um, to a different army, I would take a hard look and see if that's true. Because the fact is that um, those guys that switch armies and all that sort of thing, they also play with those armies a lot more than once or twice generally before they come into a tournament and start playing with them. They play with them an unbelievable amount. And yeah, a guy can switch from Death Guard to Drakari to Admech to Sisters to whatever comes out next and do really well if they're getting in, 10 games a week. 10 games a week, I can learn most factions, but don't discount that. Don't sit there and just say, oh, it's just because they switched. It's because they switched to a good codex, yes, and they worked really hard at it. Like it's hard work learning a codex. It's hard work, and that's why I say, like, if you don't mind putting in the work, then by all means, switch, or you have the time to put in the work. Switch around if you have the means and whatnot, and you want to do that. But the fact is most players don't. Most players, it takes a while to get your faction down and stuff like that. And you can switch all you want, but if you're not at that level where you're doing that, unbelievable amount of games per week, you have a really solid foundation of the game as a whole. You have really diverse playtesting group, and all these other things that come into play. Look at those before you start going, well, it's just because of my army. Just because of my army, and that's the only reason I can't win this or win that and all that sort of thing. Like, there's a lot of other things to improve on that you can help a lot more before you start just complaining that the only reason somebody wins is because of being able to switch. I'm not saying it doesn't help, but I'm saying it's not the only reason. I'm saying that it's also because of the hard work they put in. It's also because they practiced with it. It's also because they play test and they've looked up and down and they've done the math, crunched the numbers. That's what I think personally. But yeah, I mean, do yourself a favor, stick with your army, learn it really well, use that as your foundation, and hopefully when it's your turn to get a good codex, you have stuff ready, and if not, make that thing work for you. I can tell you right now, those good players, if certain people really believe that it's just a matter of switching armies, I would invite lots of players outside of those upper echelons of players to take my army, or to take one of those guys' armies or whatever. Pit them against me. I'll play a different kind of army, and we'll see what happens. And I think if you don't have the good fundamentals, you'll find that you can still definitely be beaten building the new hotness.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, that's a continuation of your mindset earlier about, putting the onus on yourself and the hard work and the tactical mindset. So I really like that opinion you have there. And then Weston, for you as well, someone just getting into the competitive scene, what advice do you have for them?
So because you're getting back into you're getting into the competitive scene. So my normal advice to people who are starting 40k, when they pick an army, I tell them to just pick an army that they like the looks of, the aesthetics of, and something they want to try painting, and then just pick the units they like. Don't worry about how they perform. But now that you're moving into a competitive environment, you need to start thinking about what performs well and what to do to help balance that and what you should get. So you do have to start making more important list choices. And list building is a very important thing. It's gonna determine like what you can do just based off of what you bring in your list. Like I know that's a very basic, like everyone understands that, but sometimes they don't comprehend that. Like I've done this to myself a couple times where I've built lists and they perform very well on the ground. This is actually an 8th edition thing before I fixed the plug on it. I would do super good on the ground, but then there was a specific list during the Iron Hands era where there was 11 flyers, and I found out that I only had 2 ways to deal with flyers, and they were characters on jump packs, and it was not a good method. So eventually started changing my list around to start dealing with flyers. Now, granted, that list was an extreme, but it showed a weakness in my list that I'd never really experienced before, was that even a single flyer could get a couple turns of flying around and just doing whatever it wants before I can get to it. And that's not bueno. You want to be able to threaten everything that gets within range. So list building is important. Pick an army that you want to paint. A lot of people, I know there's people who don't like painting, or they try it and they get burned out or something. Like, everyone has their own thing, but like, I still think you should try to paint your army as best you can. After the first game, so obviously anyone who's painted their models knows that the first game of a fully painted model, it gets destroyed terribly every time. It'll always roll bad. That's the curse of the newly painted model. But after that, it goes good. So you got to get over that little curse, and then you're good to go. But I just think it looks better to have your army on the table and not just gray or just like the bare minimum. Anyone here who's like Mark has definitely seen it. The bare minimum tournament standard. It looks like just mush on a palette, and it looks awful. So I'd recommend start doing that. Get practice games in. Get it a community. So like if you don't have a community, that's gonna be rough. Because then you're gonna have to travel to go places. There is other methods to practice, but like they're not like hands on, which I enjoy. I learn a lot from playing the game. I can pick up stuff from talking about it and reading about it, but playing the game is where I can get my most of my learning from. I'm a kind of hands-on person. If you do have a community though to play games or play with multiple people, one thing I recommend though is once you build your list, play that list, even no matter how bad you think that list is, play that list a minimum of like 3 or 4 times against different armies. I'd recommend playing that list like 5 or 6 times, because then you really get the feel for the list and you can understand what your units are doing. And like one game you could play against Chaos and you have a unit that like does absolutely nothing, but then you play against like say Tau, and that unit all of a sudden won you the game. So like it's really good not to just play like one opponent and one army and go, or just one game and go, all right, this list is bad, time to change it up. Because what you need to do is get a feeling and see for what each unit does and how they perform and what they can do. And plus it helps you learn. So like you can learn a trick against like, let's say your Tau player. You can learn a really cool trick against him, and that trick might come in handy later on down the road against like a Space Marine player or something. So it's always good to play multiple armies and people to get different views. One thing I just started doing actually is because I'm relatively good with when it comes to the Space Wolf rules. I know them off the back of the hand. The only thing that I forget occasionally is the Space Marine stratagems, and it's usually the ones from the core book and not the Space Wolves ones specific. Is me and my opponents when we play our test games, we'll actually trade armies. So I'll take his army and he'll take mine, and it allows me to look at my army from another angle. So now I can get to try to kill my army. So one thing that I've actually, I don't know if other people struggled with, I've struggled with, is I'll look at a unit and go like, oh, that unit's so easy to kill, I need to keep it alive or whatever, and then like I'll go play on the tabletop and it'll get wiped out or something, and then I'll play against my own army with someone else's, and I'll look at it and I'll go like, well, that unit's actually not nearly as easy to kill as I expected. There's like just by averages alone or something else, like hiding it well, there's things you can do, but it helps give you a perspective against yourself. So like if your army relies on running up forward and charging and stuff, playing it is good, but playing against it also helps you look from your opponent's perspective on how you need to maneuver and how they can maneuver to shut you down. So it's just something I recommend when you get more experience, but you should always stick with the list you build and pick a list that you like. For like the longest time, I personally disliked Primaris for a long time. I refused to use them. I didn't like their lore. I disliked them from a lore perspective. Let me say that. I really like their models. The models look good. They did a good job with them. I dislike their lore, and because I'm a lore player, it bugged me for a long time. It wasn't until I was able to kit bash up my Primaris units, which you've seen a couple of them, that I was able to accept them and use them, which is a bad excuse, but that's just my own little personal thing. So like, find the units you like, and get good with them. Is what I could recommend the most. And things change, unfortunately. Like I loved my Leviathan, but Leviathan is pretty bad right now. You have to put a lot of effort in to make it good. Maybe if Forge World gives it Volkite, like big Volkite arms, you'll see a lot more Leviathans because the Volkite is the new hotness right now. But yeah, that's really all the advice I got. Unless you got any more questions.
Yeah, I just got one more question as we're wrapping it up before we get into the plugs. Obviously, we're all in the military. Do you guys think that physical fitness has any play in this game, or is it kind of just not really matter?
I do. I'll say that I think they there's definitely something to be said about being able to keep a sharp mind. The more you're getting exhausted throughout the day, the harder it's going to be to think. You talked about earlier, ibuprofen's for old people and whatnot, but it turns out it helps after playing 3 games. I think anybody who's played 3 games throughout the day has felt that exhaustion and that tiredness. And there's a big difference when you're someone who, is a little more physically in shape and has more physical endurance comparatively to who, is more sedentary and to go throughout the day like that. So I do think it actually does help. I definitely noticed a change in how I would feel at tournaments. I recently got back into shape after I had surgery. I had surgery from an injury deployment, and after surgery, you go from working out so much in the military to not being able to work out at all. But I was feeling like I was working day, and so I gained a lot of weight, and finally I'm off of profile and I started working out again and all that sort of thing. And it's like I have way more endurance throughout the day. I have I definitely feel more mental acuity and sharpness within when I'm sitting there and looking at lists and stuff like that, and trying to calculate things. So I think it does help. I think having fitness helps you overall and play at a different level.
Okay,
Oh, I
Weston,
agree.
same thoughts.
Everyone who's been to an event, the listeners that have been to events, and then people or everyone in this chat has been to events. You've seen the people. Some of the older community, struggles to stay standing for the entire game, and like physical fitness helps keep you standing. It doesn't make you as tired. Like you're not getting as exhausted, just like what Mark said. So you're not like distracted. Drinking water is also important. I know like it's common sense to drink water, but a lot of people don't actually drink water, and a lot of 40k players aren't like the most fit. Obviously, you've seen a lot of them. So drinking water is important because it just helps. The Advil does help at the end of the game. That's mostly because you're probably tired. If you go hard, like if you have like 3 hard games in a row, like you're exhausted, and I know that feeling. Especially if you can pull out wins, just like 3 excruciating wins back to back. That's pretty rough. But staying fit is important. Obviously, because we're in the military, we don't have a choice. We have to keep our standards no matter what. So that's that. But for like the average person, like staying relatively fit can help you. One thing I actually do, funny enough, it's kind of funny you brought this up. Usually when I do my runs, when I go running in the mornings, you would do like 2 miles for normal stuff, and I'll think about 40k tactics while I'm running to distract myself because I hate running if I'm not listening to music or like daydreaming when I run. Yeah, I get super bored and I want it to end. So I usually distract myself. I'll do like 40k or I'll replay battle reports in my head or something, or I'll think about a model I want to convert or stuff like that. So like that's kind of like offshooting, but it helps with physical fitness in itself.
Okay, yeah. So you guys are both in the Army and on the Army esports team. So I'll give you an opportunity here to give whatever plug out you want. Where can they find more?
So the Army esports team has a Discord. The Discord I'll give to you the link. So you could post that on your video or however you want to do that.
Yeah, I'll post it in the description.
And then along with itself, there's also a merchandise tab. So if people want to represent the esports team or the veterans who want to wear some army gear or whatever, just anyone who wants to wear it in general, we have jackets and shirts and stuff with logos that they can buy, and I'll shoot you a link too for that, so you can post that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's the primary access is on the Discord page. We do also have a Facebook page, which I'll give you the link for that as well. I think you're already on it, but it's called Black and Gold Wargaming. We post updates there. We're not the Facebook page is not directly linked to the esports team, so it's not run by the esports team. It's just run by players who play on the Army esports team. So it's not like an official Facebook page, but it is a page for the 40k specific stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you see me on Discord, my tag's Leviathan on there, and then the Facebook group, the Black and Gold Wargaming community is a really good Facebook group. It just has a lot of the Army team on it, though it's separate from the Army team. It just happens to have a lot of our players on it, and it's got a good community of veterans and general just people from all over that really enjoy playing Warhammer. Feel free to hit us up and talk to us if you see us. Like I said, you'll usually see us in our jerseys. Mine says Leviathan on the back and Staff Sergeant H. And if you see me, feel free to come say hi. I always love BSing with people and meeting new people. It's really fun, and I'm more than down to talk about chaos with. I'll still talk with Imperium.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark and Weston. I hope to have you guys on as soon as I can again.
Yeah, it was a great talk.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.